There was a particular kind of torture in wanting someone who belonged to someone else's story. Not romantically, worse. Henry belonged to her father's brotherhood, a bond built over 30 years of loyalty, shared wars, and a trust so sacred it had a name in their circle, unbreakable. Iris had grown up watching that bond from the outside, memorizing the way Henry laughed at her father's terrible jokes, the way his gray eyes softened when he thought no one was watching. Now she was watching him from across his study, and the softness was gone, replaced by something sharp, guarded, and dangerously aware. Your father didn't send you here to redecorate, Iris. Henry didn't look up from his brief, a glass of bourbon catching the lamplight beside him. The study smelled of leather and old wood, the same scent that had meant safety when she was 7. Now it meant something entirely different. He sent me here to study, which I can do perfectly well in my own apartment. She stepped further into the room, watching his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Unless there's another reason you insisted on this arrangement. Before we get into the main story, let me know in the comments section where you are watching from, subscribe and share because I have more interesting stories to share with you. The penthouse was exactly what Iris expected, and everything she resented. Floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture that looked like it had never been touched, and a kitchen so spotless it might as well have been staged for a real estate listing. Henry lived here the way he lived his life, with surgical precision and absolutely no warmth. Zach's departure had been brief and characteristically military. A firm hug, a hand on Henry's shoulder, and a look that said everything words couldn't. Take care of her, brother. She's all I have. With my life, Henry had promised. And Iris had watched the exchange from the doorway, her overnight bag hanging from one shoulder, already cataloging every rule Henry would try to impose. The rules came within the first hour. Shoes off at the door. No cooking after 10 p.m., the neighbors have complained before. And the study is off limits after 8 unless I'm working. Henry stood at the kitchen island, arms crossed, rattling off his conditions like a closing argument. Off limits? Iris set her suitcase down with a deliberate thud. I'm here to study law, Henry. Your study is the only room in this apartment with enough shelf space for my case files. Use the spare bedroom desk, which faces a wall. She walked past him toward the hallway, running her fingers along the cold marble countertop. Everything in this apartment was beautiful and untouchable, just like its owner. My father asked you to look after me, not imprison me. Your father asked me to make sure you pass the bar. He followed her, his footsteps silent on the polished floors. Distractions are how people fail. And isolation is how people go insane. She stopped at the window, watching the city pulse below them. Then she turned, meeting his gaze with the same directness that made her professors uncomfortable. I'm not 12, Henry. I don't need a babysitter. I need space to work in a kitchen where I can cook without feeling like a criminal. Something shifted behind his gray eyes, a flicker of recognition that the girl he used to ruffle the hair of no longer existed. She watched him recalibrate, watched the slight adjustment in his posture as he registered the woman standing before him. Fine, he said after a long pause. Cook whenever you want. But the study remains mine until 8. I'll take it after 8, then. She smiled, small and victorious. Iris. His voice carried a warning she chose to ignore. She walked past him toward the spare bedroom, already mentally rearranging his carefully ordered world. The apartment was cold, sterile, designed for a man who'd built walls so high he'd forgotten what it felt like to let anyone past them. Well, she had 4 months to change that. As she unpacked, Iris glanced back toward the study where Henry had retreated, the door closing with a firm click. Behind that door was a man drowning in his own discipline, too proud to admit it. Iris had always been good at swimming. The brief was a mess. 60 pages of tangled testimony, contradictory witness statements, and a defense strategy that had more holes than substance. Henry had been staring at it for 3 hours when Iris appeared in the study doorway at 8:15 p.m., right on schedule. "You look like a man who's losing an argument with his own case," she said, settling into the leather armchair across from his desk without waiting for an invitation. "I'm not losing anything. I'm refining. You're stuck." She nodded toward the scattered papers. "The prosecution's timeline doesn't add up. You've been trying to attack their evidence individually, but you're missing the pattern." Henry's pen stilled. "And you know how?" "Because I've read the case file. All 60 pages. Twice." She tucked her legs beneath her, comfortable in a way that irritated and intrigued him in equal measure. "Professor Kaplan assigned it as a study exercise last semester. I wrote a 40-page analysis on it." "You wrote a 40-page," he stopped himself, recalibrating. This was Zach's daughter. The girl who used to fall asleep on his couch during family dinners. But the woman sitting before him wasn't falling asleep anywhere. She was looking at him with the sharp, calculating focus of someone who belonged in a courtroom. "Walk me through it," he said. Iris leaned forward, and the study light caught the angles of her face, the determined set of her jaw, the intelligence burning in her eyes. Henry noticed, and immediately wished he hadn't. The prosecution built their case around 3 key moments. But if you look at the GPS data from the defendant's vehicle, the second moment is physically impossible. He couldn't have been at the crime scene and the gas station simultaneously. "I already identified that discrepancy." "You identified it as an anomaly." "It's not an anomaly, it's the crack in their entire narrative." She stood, moving to the desk, close enough that Henry could smell her perfume, something warm and subtle that had no business being in his study. "If that one moment collapses, their timeline collapses. And if their timeline collapses, every piece of evidence they've built around it becomes circumstantial." Henry stared at her. Not in the case file. At her. The precision of her thinking, the confidence with which she dismantled a prosecution strategy that had stumped him for days. This wasn't a student parroting textbook analysis. This was genuine legal instinct, the kind that couldn't be taught. "You should have led with that," he said quietly. "I wanted to see if you'd find it yourself first." Her smile was dangerous, playful and knowing and entirely too close. Was that arrogant? It was brilliant. The word escaped before he could filter it. Henry watched something flicker across Iris's face, surprise, pleasure, and something deeper that made the air between them thicken. He cleared his throat, retreating behind professionalism. "Sit down. We have work to do." They worked until 2 a.m., building a defense strategy that dismantled the prosecution piece by piece. Iris matched his argument for argument, never backing down, never deferring. At one point, Henry caught himself watching her instead of reading, the way she bit her lip when she was thinking, the way her hands moved expressively when she made a point. He looked away, jaw tightening. Zach's daughter. Off limits. Always. But when Iris finally left, pausing at the doorway to say goodnight with that quiet, knowing smile, Henry realized something had fundamentally shifted. The girl was gone. The woman had arrived. And he had absolutely no idea what to do about it. The insomnia hit at 2 a.m., as it always did. Iris padded barefoot into the kitchen, expecting silence. Instead, she found Henry at the dining table, still in his work clothes, his jacket discarded and his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. A bottle of bourbon sat between him and a second glass, empty, as though he'd been expecting company he never thought would come. "Can't sleep?" she asked from the doorway. He didn't startle. Henry never startled. Occupational hazard. The mind doesn't shut off when the case is complicated. Which case? All of them. He lifted his glass, studying the amber liquid like it held answers. "Sit down, Iris. Or don't. I won't force conversation." She sat. Poured herself a measure of bourbon without asking permission. The warmth of it spread through her chest as she watched him, this man who carried himself like armor in every room, now sitting in his own kitchen looking quietly, devastatingly human. "My mother used to do this," he said suddenly, his voice low and distant. "Sit up late with bourbon when the world feels too heavy." Said the drink didn't solve anything, but it made the weight bearable for a few hours. "Used to?" "She died when I was 23. Heart attack. No warning, no dramatic decline. She was making breakfast one morning and simply stopped." He took a slow sip. "I think that's when I decided to stop feeling things in real time. Started processing them later, in controlled doses. Like case files." Iris held her glass carefully, afraid that any sudden movement might break whatever had opened in him. "Is that why you don't let anyone close?" Henry's eyes shifted to hers, sharp, exposed, and more vulnerable than she'd ever seen them. "I let your father close. That was enough intimacy for one lifetime. Zach isn't intimacy. He's loyal." "Is there a difference?" "A massive one." She leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Loyalty is showing up. Intimacy is letting someone see you when you're not performing." She gestured around the sterile apartment. "This place is a performance, Henry. The perfect furniture, the controlled temperature, the bourbon you drink alone at 2 a.m. because admitting you're lonely would feel like losing a case." His jaw tightened. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. "When did you get so perceptive?" he asked quietly. "I've always been perceptive. You just never bothered to notice." She softened her voice. "My dad talks about you constantly. The great Henry Calloway, undefeated in court, loyal to a fault. But he never mentions you laughing. Never describe a woman you loved, a life you actually lived outside these walls. Because there wasn't one. There could be." The words hung in the air between them, simple, devastating, and loaded with everything neither of them was ready to say. Henry held her gaze for a long, dangerous moment. Then he looked down at his bourbon, and Iris watched his walls rebuild themselves in real time. "It's late," he said. "It is." She stood, but paused beside him. On impulse, she placed her hand briefly over his warm skin against cold fingers. "You don't have to drink alone, Henry." "Not anymore." She left before he could respond. But when she glanced back from the hallway, she saw him staring at his hand where she'd touched it, his expression cracked wide open like a verdict he hadn't seen coming. The text arrived at 6 p.m., a simple message from a classmate named Daniel asking Iris to dinner. She accepted before she could overthink it, partly because he was intelligent and kind, and partly because she needed to prove something. To herself. To Henry. To the universe that she was a 21-year-old woman with a life outside these pristine walls. Getting ready was an act of quiet rebellion. She chose a black dress that sat just above her knee, simple but undeniably striking. When she emerged into the living room, Henry was on the couch reviewing briefs, his reading glasses perched low on his nose in a way that made him look almost approachable. He looked up. Something flickered across his face, too fast to name, but she felt it like a change in air pressure. Going somewhere? His voice was carefully neutral. Dinner. A classmate invited me. She reached for her coat, watching his reaction from her periphery. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Don't wait up. I won't. She left. The dinner was pleasant enough, Daniel was charming, the restaurant was quiet, and the conversation flowed easily. But Iris found herself checking her phone twice, waiting for a message that never came. At 10 p.m., she said goodnight and took a cab home. The apartment was dark except for the steady light bleeding under the door. She found Henry exactly where she'd left him, on the couch, but the briefs were abandoned. He was standing now, bourbon in hand, staring out the window at the city with an expression that looked dangerously close to fury. "How was dinner?" he asked without turning. "Fine. Daniel is lovely." Daniel. He said the name like it was evidence he was examining. "The third-year transfer? You know him?" "I know of him. His father's firm handled a case I prosecuted 2 years ago. Sloppy work. Cut corners." He finally turned, and the look in his eyes made Iris's breath catch. "Is he worth your time?" "That's not your decision to make, Henry." "You're right. It's not." He set his glass down with a sharp click. "So why does it feel like watching you walk out that door tonight was the worst case I've ever lost?" The confession detonated in the space between them. Iris felt her heart slam against her ribs, felt the months of careful distance collapse in a single breath. "Say that again," she whispered. "Don't." His voice was raw, desperate. "Don't make me say it again, Iris. Because if I do, I can't take it back." "Then don't take it back." She crossed the room toward him, each step deliberate, closing the distance he'd spent months trying to maintain. "Stop fighting this. Stop treating what you feel like it's something shameful. It is shameful. Your father." "My father isn't here." She stopped inches from him, close enough to feel the heat radiating off his body, the tension vibrating through him like a bowstring. "Right now, it's just you and me. And you just told me the truth for the first time since I moved in." Henry's composure shattered. He kissed her like a man drowning, desperate, consuming, his hands framing her face with a tenderness that contradicted the hunger in his mouth. Iris kissed him back with everything she had, her fingers threading through his hair, pulling him closer until there was no space left between them. When they finally broke apart, both gasping, Henry pressed his forehead against hers. "This changes everything. I know. Zach will never forgive me. I know. I don't care." The words came out wrecked and honest. "God help me, Iris. I don't care." She kissed him again, softer this time, a promise rather than a collision. And when Henry lifted her, carrying her toward the bedroom with a reverence that made her chest ache, Iris knew there was no going back. The line had been crossed. And neither of them wanted to uncross it. The first sign was a black sedan parked across from Henry's office building 3 mornings in a row. Iris noticed it on her way to the library, the same make, the same tinted windows, the same conspicuous stillness in a street where everything else moved. She mentioned it to Henry that evening over dinner, but he dismissed it with a wave of his hand. Probably a surveillance firm. Half the cases I handle involve corporate espionage. It's nothing new. But Iris saw the way his eyes sharpened when he said it. Henry didn't dismiss things easily. He catalogued them. The second sign came 4 days later. A manila envelope slid under the front door at midnight. No return address, no postmark. Inside were photographs, grainy, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. Iris leaves Henry's building in the early morning hours. Henry's hand on the small of her back as they entered a restaurant. The two of them laughing on a park bench, their body language screaming intimacy to anyone who knew what to look for. Henry stared at the photos for a long time, his face carved from stone. "Victor Hale," he said finally. "Who?" "A rival attorney. We've been competing for the same high-profile clients for 15 years. He set the photos down with deliberate care, like handling evidence. "He lost the Morrison case to me last month. Cost him a 7-figure retainer. He's been looking for leverage ever since. These photos aren't useful unless someone cares about what they show." Iris watched his expression carefully. "Unless he takes them to the Bar Association." Henry's silence confirmed everything. "What happens if he does?" "An ethics investigation. My firm would distance itself immediately, can't have a scandal attached to their name." He poured bourbon with hands that weren't quite steady. "Your father would find out before the investigation concluded. And Hale would make sure every detail was public. Then we get ahead of it." Iris moved to stand beside him, close but not touching. They'd become careful in public spaces, even their own home. "We control the narrative before Hale does." "How?" "By announcing to the world that I'm sleeping with my best friend's daughter." The bitterness in his voice cut like a blade. "That's not controlling a narrative, Iris. That's detonating a bomb. Better we detonate it than let Hale." Henry drained his glass, refilled it, and stared out at the city. The silence stretched between them, heavy with consequences neither had fully anticipated when they'd crossed that line weeks ago. "I need to meet with Hale," he said suddenly. "Find out exactly what he has and what he wants." "Alone?" "Yes." He turned to her, and the conflict in his gray eyes was devastating, desire warring with the instinct to protect, guilt competing with something that looked terrifyingly close to devotion. "If he sees us together, he knows he has power. I need to appear unthreatened." "And if he's bluffing?" "Victor Hale doesn't bluff." Henry set his glass down and crossed to her, cupping her face with both hands. The tenderness undid her more than any kiss could. "Promise me something." "What?" "If this goes badly, if the investigation happens, if everything falls apart, promise me you won't blame yourself." "Henry." "Promise me, Iris." She covered his hands with hers, holding his gaze. "I promise. But nothing is falling apart. Not if we fight this together." He kissed her forehead, lingering there like he was memorizing the moment. When he pulled back, his expression had shifted from vulnerable to determined, the courtroom mask sliding into place. "Together, then," he said quietly. "But Iris, from tomorrow, we have to be careful. No more mornings leaving together. No more restaurants where someone might recognize us. You want to hide. I want to survive long enough to figure out how to keep you." The raw honesty in his voice made her breath catch. "That's not hiding. That's strategy." She nodded, understanding the weight of what he was protecting, not just his career, but the fragile, impossible thing growing between them that neither of them was ready to lose. The black sedan disappeared the next morning. But the manila envelope sat on Henry's desk like a ticking clock, and both of them knew the countdown had already begun. The jazz club on 47th Street had no sign outside, just a wooden door and a set of stairs leading down into amber light and the kind of music that made the city disappear. Iris had found it by accident during a late-night walk, and when she told Henry about it, something in his eyes had shifted. Not the guarded attorney. Not the careful guardian. Just a man who desperately wanted to disappear with her for a few hours. They went on a Tuesday. Iris wore sunglasses until they were inside, and Henry kept his collar turned up against the autumn wind. Two strangers descending into a basement club, nobody watching, nobody caring about the age gap or the history or the impossible weight of what they carried. Inside, they were simply a couple. "No one knows us here," Henry murmured, his hand finding hers beneath the table. The contact was electric after days of careful distance, no touching in the apartment in case Hale had surveillance they hadn't detected, no lingering looks in public spaces. That's the point. Iris laced her fingers through his, marveling at how natural it felt. How right. Tonight, you're not a defense attorney. I'm not anyone's daughter. We're just two people who like jazz and bourbon. His smile was rare and devastating, the kind that cracked the ice of his usual composure and revealed the man underneath. I'd forgotten what that feels like. Being no one. Being someone, you mean. Someone who actually feels things instead of cataloging them. He laughed, genuinely laughed, and the sound of it made Iris's chest ache with how much she wanted this version of him to exist outside these walls. They found more places like it over the following weeks. A bookshop in Brooklyn where they spent Saturday afternoons arguing over legal philosophy between dusty shelves. A rooftop bar in the Village where the Manhattan skyline stretched before them and Henry ordered wine instead of bourbon, saying it felt like an occasion worth celebrating. A small Italian restaurant in the East Village where the owner called them the quiet couple and always brought dessert without being asked. In these stolen pockets of time, Henry shed his armor piece by piece. He told her about his first case, a wrongful conviction he'd overturned at 26 that had made him believe in the law. About the woman he'd loved briefly in his 30s who'd left because he couldn't stop working long enough to be present. About the hollow years that followed, filled with cases and bourbon and the slow, quiet acceptance that he traded his heart for his reputation. Was it worth it? Iris asked one evening on the rooftop, the city glittering below them like scattered diamonds. It was until you moved into my apartment and ruined everything. But he said it with such warmth that Iris felt tears prick her eyes. Their evenings always ended the same way, a taxi back to the penthouse, the careful re-erection of boundaries once inside. Henry would disappear into his study. Iris would retreat to her room. And the distance between them felt like punishment for something that wasn't a crime. "How long do we keep doing this?" she asked one night, standing in the hallway between their separate doors. "Until Hale makes his move. Until I can protect us both." Henry's hand lifted, brushing a strand of hair from her face with aching gentleness. "Until I figure out how to keep you without losing everything else." "And if you can't have both?" He held her gaze, and in his gray eyes she saw the answer he wasn't ready to say out loud, that he'd already made his choice. Had made it the moment he kissed her in the living room weeks ago. "Then I choose you," he whispered. "I choose you every time." Iris rose on her toes and kissed him softly, once, brief and burning, before retreating to her room. Behind her closed door, she pressed her back against it and smiled. The city held 1,000 secrets. Theirs was just one more. but it was the only one worth keeping. The message arrived at 3 a.m., a satellite call, crackling and brief, the kind that only came when Zach's mission parameters allowed limited communication. Henry was still awake, as he usually was these days, sitting in the study with a case file he hadn't read in an hour. Henry. Change of plans. Coming home early. 2 weeks, maybe less. Tell Iris I'm proud of her. And brother, take care of yourself too. The call ended. Henry stared at the phone in his hand like it had detonated in his palm. 2 weeks. He found Iris in the kitchen the next morning, perched on the counter with her laptop open and a cup of coffee steaming beside her. She looked up with that quiet smile that had become the first thing he wanted to see every day, and the sight of it made his chest physically ache with what he was about to do. Zach called last night, he said, keeping his voice clinical. Controlled. The courtroom voice. He's coming home early. 2 weeks. Iris set her laptop down slowly. How early? Early enough that we need to have a conversation about boundaries. He couldn't look at her. Couldn't afford to, because looking at Iris when she was hurt made him want to burn the world down, and he needed to be rational right now. What's been happening between us, it ends. Today. The silence that followed was brutal. You're serious? Not a question. She heard the steel in his voice and recognized it for what it was, not conviction, but desperation. I have to be. He finally met her eyes, and the pain he saw there nearly broke him. Zach trusts me with everything. His life, his reputation, his daughter. If he comes home and finds out what we've been doing. What we've been doing is falling in love, Henry. The word landed like a verdict. Henry's composure fractured visibly, jaw tightening, hands clenching at his sides, gray eyes betraying the war raging behind them. It doesn't matter what it is. It matters what it looks like. He turned away, gripping the kitchen counter. I won't be the man who broke my best friend's trust. Not for anything. Not even for me? Her voice was quiet, devastated. Especially not for you. He spun back, and the rawness in his expression made her breath catch. Do you understand what happens if Zach finds out? He doesn't just lose his best friend. He loses his faith in every relationship he's ever had. Everything he built his life around, loyalty, brotherhood, trust, I destroy it all by choosing you. So your friendship matters more than what we have? My friendship is the only thing keeping your father sane while he's deployed in a war zone. Henry's voice cracked. I can't take that away from him. Not now. Not like this. Iris slid off the counter, crossing to him with slow, deliberate steps. He backed away until his shoulders hit the wall, trapped, not by the room, but by her proximity and the devastating calm in her eyes. You're afraid, she said softly. Not losing Zach. Of admitting that someone matters more than your control. Iris. 2 weeks, Henry. She stopped inches from him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her body. You have 2 weeks to figure out whether you're going to spend the rest of your life being the loyal friend who swallowed his heart, or the man brave enough to fight for the woman he loves. She held his gaze for a long, devastating moment. Then she turned and walked toward her room without looking back. Henry slid down the wall until he was sitting on the kitchen floor, head in his hands. The apartment was silent except for the distant hum of the city and the echo of everything he just tried to destroy. 2 weeks. 14 days to choose between the man he'd been for 45 years and the man Iris made him want to become. He already knew which one he'd choose. He just wasn't brave enough to admit it yet. The door opened at 11 p.m. on a Thursday, earlier than expected, quieter than anticipated. Zach didn't knock. He never knocked at Henry's place. 30 years of brotherhood had long since rendered that formality obsolete. Henry was in the study, reviewing the Hale situation with fresh eyes, when he heard footsteps in the hallway that didn't belong to Iris. Heavier. More purposeful. Military precision disguised as casual movement. He stood, and the blood drained from his face. Zach filled the doorway, tanned, leaner than when he'd left, still carrying the quiet intensity of a man who'd spent months in dangerous territory. His eyes swept the study with the trained observation of someone who assessed threats for a living. Then they landed on the second bourbon glass sitting beside Henry's desk. "Expecting company?" Zach asked, his voice deceptively light. "You're early." Henry's mouth had gone dry. "I didn't get a notification. Mission wrapped ahead of schedule. I wanted to surprise my daughter." Zach's eyes moved past Henry, toward the hallway. "Where is she?" As if summoned, Iris appeared at the end of the corridor, wearing an oversized sweater and bare feet, clearly dressed for bed, clearly comfortable in a way that spoke volumes about how at home she'd made herself. She froze when she saw her father. Dad. The single word carried everything: surprise, guilt, and the desperate attempt to appear normal. Iris. Zach's smile was warm, genuine, unaware. He crossed to her and pulled her into a crushing embrace. "God, I missed you. How's the studying? Henry taking good care of you?" The question was directed at Iris, but Zach's eyes flicked to Henry over her shoulder. That brotherly look, trusting, grateful, utterly unsuspecting. Henry felt something inside him crack. "He's been wonderful," Iris said, her voice carefully steady. "Really wonderful." They moved to the living room. Zach settled into the couch like he owned the place, which, in many ways, he did. 30 years of friendship had given him permanent residency in Henry's world. He talked about the mission, about coming home, about wanting to take Iris out for breakfast in the morning. Henry sat across from him, nodding at the right moments, saying the right things, while something inside him screamed. Then Iris's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, a text from Henry, sent 2 minutes ago. "Don't say anything. Let me handle this." She looked up, met his eyes across the room, and nodded almost imperceptibly. But fate, as it always does, had other plans. Zach stood to use the bathroom, passing through the hallway. Henry watched him go, already calculating how to survive the next 30 minutes. Then he noticed it, the jacket draped over the hallway chair. Iris's jacket. But not just her jacket. Underneath it, partially visible, was Henry's scarf. The one he'd wrapped around her neck last Tuesday evening at the rooftop bar when the wind picked up. The one she'd kept, tucked it into her bag with a smile that had made his heart ache. Zach stopped. Henry watched his best friend's eyes track the details with military precision: the scarf, the jacket, the intimate arrangement that spoke of shared warmth, shared moments, shared space. Then Zach's gaze traveled to the kitchen counter where 2 wine glasses still sat from the previous evening. Not bourbon. Wine. The kind Henry only drank on occasions worth celebrating. Zach turned slowly. His face was expressionless, the same blank mask he wore in the field when processing information that could change everything. "Henry." His voice was dangerously quiet. "What is that?" "Zach." "What is that?" Each word landed like a gavel. Iris appeared in the hallway, having heard the shift in tone. She saw her father's face, saw the scarf, understood instantly that the careful architecture of their secret had just collapsed. "Dad, it's not. Don't." Zach held up a hand, his eyes never leaving Henry's. "Don't insult me by finishing that sentence." The silence that followed was suffocating. Henry stood slowly, deliberately, meeting his best friend's gaze with the same steadiness he brought to the most hostile courtrooms. "It's exactly what it looks like," Henry said quietly. "And I'm sorry." Something shattered behind Zach's eyes, not anger, not yet. Something worse. Betrayal. The slow, devastating realization that the man he trusted with his life and his daughter had been lying to him. "How long?" Zach's voice was barely above a whisper. 2 months. 2 months. Zach laughed, a hollow, broken sound that made Iris flinch. 2 months, Henry. I trusted you. I put my daughter in your hands because you were the one person on earth I believed would never. His voice cracked. He pressed his fist against his mouth, jaw working, and Henry saw something he'd never seen in 30 years of friendship. Zach's eyes were filling with tears. "Dad," Iris stepped forward. "Stay back." Zach's hand trembled as he pointed at her, then at Henry. "You. Both of you. Tell me the truth. All of it. Right now." Henry looked at Iris, at the woman who had dismantled every wall he'd built, who had made him feel alive for the first time in decades. Then he looked at Zach, at the brother who had trusted him unconditionally, whose faith he was about to destroy forever. "I love her," Henry said. The words came out steady, final, irrevocable. "I tried to stop it. I tried to honor what you and I have. But I love her, Zach. And I won't lie about it anymore." The room held its breath. Zach stared at Henry for a long, devastating moment. Then he turned and walked out the door without another word. The click of the lock echoed through the penthouse like a sentence being handed down. The resignation letter was 1 page. After 22 years at Callaway and Associates, Henry reduced his departure to 4 paragraphs and a signature. No drama, no lengthy explanation. Just the quiet closing of a chapter that had defined his entire adult life. He handed it to his senior partner on a Monday morning, watching the man's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and something that looked almost like respect. "This is sudden, Henry. It's overdue." He stood, buttoning his jacket with the same precision he'd brought to every courtroom for 2 decades. "I'll honor my notice period. But I'm done after that." The news spread through the legal community like wildfire. Henry Callaway, undefeated, untouchable, legendary, walking away from everything he'd built. The speculation was immediate and vicious. Mental breakdown. Secret illness. A scandal too embarrassing to surface publicly. The truth was simpler. He was choosing to live. Iris found him that evening on the rooftop of their apartment building, their building now, not his alone. The city sprawled below them in its usual indifferent glory, traffic humming, lights flickering, millions of lives unfolding without any awareness of the 2 people sitting on the edge of it all. "How did it feel?" she asked, tucking her legs beneath her on the worn concrete bench. "Terrifying." He handed her a glass of wine. "Not bourbon. And the most honest thing I've done in 20 years. You don't regret it?" Henry considered the question carefully, the way he considered everything, examining it from every angle before delivering his verdict. "I regret that it took me so long." I regret the months I spent pushing you away out of fear. I regret every evening I sat in that study drinking alone when you were 50 feet away and I was too much of a coward to cross the hallway. Iris leaned into him, her head finding the space against his shoulder that felt like it had been designed for exactly this purpose. What about Zach? The name still carried weight between them, not the crushing, suffocating weight of before, but something quieter. A bruise that was healing slowly, painfully, but healing nonetheless. He called yesterday. Henry's voice softened. First time since that night. Iris lifted her head. What did he say? Not much. He asked if I was okay. If you were okay. Henry stared out at the skyline, processing the memory. Then he said something I didn't expect. He said, I watched you become a ghost, Henry. I just didn't know why until now. Did he forgive you? Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. Henry turned to face her, and the honesty in his gray eyes was almost painful in its openness. But he's trying. And that's more than I deserved. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, letting the city noise fill the spaces between them. Below, somewhere, Victor Hale had quietly dropped his threat after Henry's resignation made the leverage meaningless. The scandal had never materialized, just whispers in legal circles that faded as quickly as they'd started. So what happens now? Iris asked eventually. Now I figure out what Henry Calloway looks like without a courtroom. He took her hand, threading their fingers together with the easy intimacy of people who'd fought through fire to earn this moment. I'm thinking about teaching constitutional law at the university. Less pressure. More purpose. And us? He lifted their joined hands, pressing his lips to her knuckles. Us continues. Loudly. Proudly. Without apology. His smile was small but genuine, the rare, devastating expression she'd spent months coaxing out of him. I spent 45 years building walls, Iris. You demolished every single one. I'm not rebuilding them. Good. She kissed him softly. Because I'd just tear them down again. They stayed on the rooftop until the stars emerged, faint and stubborn against the city's light pollution, but present. Always present, if you knew where to look. Henry had spent a lifetime not looking. Not at the stars, not at the warmth waiting in his own home, not at the woman who saw through every carefully constructed defense he'd ever built. Now he looked. At Iris beside him, at the city below them, at the future stretching ahead, messy and uncertain and gloriously, terrifyingly alive. I love you, he said quietly. Simply. Like a verdict finally delivered after the longest trial of his life. Iris smiled, that quiet, knowing smile that had started everything. I know. I've been waiting for you to say it out loud for a very long time. Below them, the city hummed on. Somewhere across town, Zach was sitting in his own apartment, rereading old photos of three people who used to share holidays and laughter and an unbreakable bond. The healing would take time. The friendship might never fully recover. But Henry and Iris had chosen each other, not in secret, not in shame, but in the full, unflinching light of day. And sometimes, the bravest verdict isn't the one that wins the case. It's the one that finally tells the truth. Thank you for watching and listening to this story. Hit the subscribe button as I will be bringing more interesting stories. Turn on your notification because you would not want to miss my story for anything.